Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Red Gaming Tech.com video, we're going to be discussing as well as analysing tech news, which as usual has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. Hopefully you're having an amazing day. We've got a lot of stuff to get through in today's video regarding RDNA 2, plus some other news as well. But I think the first thing to start out with are the shortages for these cards. Now, RDNA 2 is not the only product which has faced shortages this year. Obviously, the consoles for both Sony as well as Microsoft are obvious candidates. Zen 3 as well from AMD, and Nvidia's RTX 30 series is still facing shortages even now, although to my understanding it seems that availability of the 30 series has started to get a little better. To my understanding, the RTX 3070 is going to start improving by later part of this year / early next year. There should be a much larger number of cards on the market, and I believe that the 3060 Ti, which of course we discussed those leaks yesterday, is also going to have a decent amount of availability. But with that said, RDNA 2 was always going to be heavily sought after simply because it was the first high performance card from AMD in quite a while, and there was just an awful lot of hype going into this, and the pricing and performance of the GPU, particularly in rasterization performance, is just a win. But with that said, the shortages are abysmal, and I think it's fair to say, looking at eBay as well, like there are multiple cards which are being listed as well above the MSRP, like several times the MSRP, which again is something that you would expect. I'm not going to go through all of the performance results of the card because I think many of you have probably already done that yourselves, but let's take a look at a couple of examples. Guru 3D has The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, which is still rather punishing on cards despite the fact it's quite old now. 150 FPS at 1440p for the 6800 XT. Meanwhile, we have OC3D.net, and their results obviously are quite similar. They've put all of their results into the same chart, and you can see the numbers yourself. Again, the 6800 XT is losing to the 3080 Founders Edition, but it's not a slouch whatsoever. Using Hexus.net, we have Gears 5, and there's not really much to say here. The 6800 XT and the 3080 are basically trading blows depending on the resolution that you're playing in. For example, the 3080 is scoring 77 frames a second versus the 6800 XT's 75 frames a second, and the 6800, just like we've seen with other benchmarks, is easily outpacing the RTX 3070. And what, of course, the key here is that the 6800 is more expensive than the 3070, whereas the 6800 XT is cheaper than the 3080. Taking a gander at Doom Eternal on Tech Power Up, we're going to look at the 4K results. We won't look at the 1440p because honestly the game runs at such high frame rates. But Doom Eternal, again, the 6800 XT is scoring 145 frames a second. We're scoring about 5 FPS higher for the Rage mode, which is a small overclock to the GPU. So marginally, behind the RTX 3080, but I mean, will you really notice 145 versus 153? No, of course you won't. We're going to pick on just a few more games before we go into the ray tracing stuff, which honestly, to me, is the perhaps more interesting side of things. The 3080 in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, again at 4K, for the average is scoring 83 and the 1% is 78, compared to the 6800 XT, which is 81/77. So again, there's not exactly a lot in it. They are, for all intents and purposes, at least I personally feel that they're trading blows. Like 90% of people would not really notice the difference. In fact, I would say 99% of people would not notice the difference if you were to do a blind comparison. Horizon Zero Dawn, it's a DX11 title, it's extremely punishing, the game engine. 69, nice, frames a second for the XT, and 59 for 1% percent, and then of course the 3080 scores 73 and 52. So I know I sound like a broken record here, but I would say that there is pretty much no difference. In fact, it's quite interesting that the RTX 3080 is scoring a lower result here. Maybe it's got something to do with the amount of VRAM. But things start to become, let's say, more interesting when we are looking at ray tracing. Keith over at WCCF Tech does a really nice breakdown actually of some of the ray tracing issues that we're seeing. Watch Dogs Legion is just not rendering, frankly, so if you see actual results for Watch Dogs Legion from any review, I would throw them out. In fact, it seems that there's just major problems with a suite of games at the moment with ray tracing. You can see the difference on the left and right images here with the screenshot that Keith's put up, and well, you can see there are tons of missing reflections and details. I don't really need to kind of, verbalize that for you all. You can see the differences yourself. But in terms of performance, the RTX 3080, this is on Shadow of the Tomb Raider at 4K with ray tracing enabled, of course, scores 43 frames a second, 33 frames a second, however, for the RX 6800 XT. But, and you knew there was that word coming, with DLSS, the performance rockets up for Nvidia's architecture to 63 frames a second. And these results are, well, just consistent throughout. For example, if we look at Control, again from WCCF Tech, with the quality settings at maximum, and obviously you've got DLSS as well, RTX 3080 scores 36 frames a second, which is much higher than the 22 frames a second of the 6800 XT. And of course, the 3080 with DLSS goes up to 65 FPS. Again, of course, this is with the DLSS set to quality, and you can start tweaking that to your heart's desire. Obviously, DLSS has different modes depending on what you want to get. I think this is even further illustrated by a really nice image from Gamers Nexus, and they are running again Control on a 10700K run at 5.1 gigahertz, 32 gigabytes of memory, yada yada yada, and well, yeah. The 6800 XT at stock is 23 frames a second average, and well, yeah, again, you can see the difference here with DLSS on and maximum ray tracing. Essentially, it's trading blows with an RTX 2060 when the 2060 has DLSS enabled, and obviously there is quite a price difference. Now, in my personal opinion, there is a lot of stuff to remember about this. First of all, you need to take into consideration that, well, some of those games are older and have not been exactly optimized for AMD's GPUs, and also it's still very early days, so drivers will definitely mature and improve, and yeah. Also, the power consumption figures for the 6800 series is very impressive. Like, basically, the card is essentially sipping power and also overclocks rather well, which has a direct impact, as I'd already leaked multiple times, to the performance because of the Infinity Cache. Obviously, all of that is a really good thing, and to me, these cards are really impressive. They are, but they are not killing Nvidia. They are not defeating Nvidia. I would say that it gives you, as an enthusiast, a choice. Now, I'm probably going to get flack for this, but this is my personal opinion. I would rather have DLSS enabled and higher performance ray tracing, because that is how I normally play games. I normally prefer to have all of the bells and whistles enabled because I generally prefer story-driven games. And so for me, higher frame rates are great, but as long as I'm hitting around 60 on most games on PC, like Shadow of the Tomb Raider type of games, I'm okay. With that said, I also do appreciate some of the characteristics of the RX 6000 series, such as the lower power consumption. At the end of the day, I am paying money for electricity, so paying more money for electricity is not exactly an ideal situation. And of course, there are other things that this does too, like increase the temperatures of your case and, increase the need for a higher power, better PSU and blah, 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 blah. What I'm trying to say to you all is it is swings and roundabouts, and in some instances, I would probably prefer to go the AMD route, and in other times, I'd prefer to go the Nvidia route. And it's clear that both architectures, RDNA 2 and Ampere, both have their wins, both have their losses, and I'm sure that you can make a really good argument and a compelling case for both. To me, at the moment, it's all about availability. And if AMD can sort out the availability, we know that I guess the Founders Edition card, the reference cards, they were rather limited. I do know that the AIB models are apparently more plentiful. That is the custom cards, which are coming later. However, I am not certain how plentiful. I know that in the UK there are around 1,200 cards for launch, which is obviously bupkis. That's the technical term. It's like nothing. But I'm sure that custom cards are going to start coming out. And as I've mentioned a couple of times now, it's going to be late this quarter and early next quarter that AMD will be rolling out the GPUs. I don't think that this is a bad look for AMD in terms of the performance. I think that AMD have done really well. The architectural jump from one generation to another has just been astounding for AMD. If you look at it from Polaris to Vega to Vega to RDNA 1, from RDNA 1 to RDNA 2, it's just staggering. Like, these are monumental leaps. But it's also hard to argue too that AMD have definitely been fixing some of the problems in their architecture. I've mentioned before that RDNA 1 was designed to basically give them a kind of springboard to a graphics architecture, a graphics focused architecture. RDNA 2 fixed the inefficiencies in the performance. It introduced Infinity Cache, which we know is an RDNA 3. It introduced hardware based ray tracing and all of these other features. And those are definitely good things, but this is why I've said numerous occasions that while RDNA 2 is exciting, and I'm certainly not saying it's a bad architecture, and I'm also not going to tell you guys that RDNA 3 will fix everything. RDNA 3 to me, as well as Nvidia's next generation architectures, are the ones that perhaps are going to be much bigger leaps. And this is because it's obvious that both AMD and Nvidia are setting things up at the moment. They're putting things into motion. And I do suspect that there's going to be drastic improvements for RDNA 3. I've already mentioned a couple of these before, but I know for a fact that hardware-based ray tracing performance goes up immeasurably for RDNA 3. Geometry performance too has drastic increases, much better culling early on in the rendering pipeline, major changes to the architecture, and yeah, there's some other stuff as well which I'm asked to not really say about at this point. Long story short, RDNA 2 has been really great. It hasn't defeated Nvidia, but it has put Nvidia on notice. And you know what? I'm really happy about that. I like the fact that we are seeing competition. I do feel, and this is from my, again, personal perspective, that the high-end cards, the RTX 3080s and those cards are very cool. And as a reviewer who has been given an RTX 3080, I feel very privileged on that. Hopefully I can get to review an RX 6000 card. That would be amazing as well. I did try to grab one and buy one. I just couldn't get one. The site just wasn't allowing me. I tried a couple of UK retailers and yeah, it was just down. By the time I managed to get on, it had just no stock left. So I did say to you guys I would try to buy an RX 6000 card, and I did, and I just couldn't. As of the time I'm recording this, I'm still waiting for my Ryzen 5000 series CPU. I'm told that I am going up slowly in the queue system, but it is what it is, right? At the end of the day, I can't, magic out a processor from thin air. But yeah, to my mind anyway, the mid range is perhaps more exciting with technology such as DLSS, and of course, AMD are going to be introducing similar with their drivers, so that's going to be an entire different shake up. I think we will see a very interesting market. And at the end of the day, assuming the RTX 3060 Ti is going to retail at 399, obviously this has not been confirmed by Nvidia at this point, I think it's going to be a really nice GPU. It should outperform slightly both next generation consoles because they're, you know, it's rumored that this GPU is about on par with an RTX 2080 Super, and of course we've seen that the console ray tracing performance is below the 2080 Super, but rasterization performance is about a 2080 Super. So one of those cards, it looks like it will outperform a console. It's 399, and it's a really good way to upgrade your system. I'm hoping that AMD will also release the 6700 series soon. Again, I'm hearing that's going to be early next year. So it's going to be fascinating to see how all of this unfolds. I also want to talk about a few other things which are AMD related, since we're, well, talking about AMD extensively in the video anyway. The first of which is an announcement actually from MSI, and it's a pretty cool one. They've confirmed that all X570, B550, as well as A520 motherboards will feature support for AMD's SAM, Smart Access Memory. This again is a cool thing. Currently, AMD's SAM obviously only works with the RX 6000 series, but we know it will eventually come to other platforms which are non-AMD, but for now, AMD are the only game in town, so to speak, with this feature. It's essentially free performance, which is only ever a good thing. I don't think anyone's ever said, hey, I actually want less performance with my hardware. And again, I also feel that this is going to be a fundamental building block of what we're going to be seeing for next generation APUs in the coming future. I would also like to discuss a very interesting discovery for Zen 4. Zen 4 is going to be a big leap in architecture. And while Zen 3 seemingly has only just been released, and the hype is, well, still hype, Zen 4 is not going to be an incremental upgrade. We know that Zen 4, of course, is going to bring entire new technology such as PCIe 5, it's going to bring DDR5 as well, and obviously those things are incredibly important. We already know that Genoa, which is the server grade processors, obviously the EPIC lineup, they will feature up to 96 cores, and we've discussed a lot of this stuff at length. But UnderFox3 on Twitter has discovered a rather interesting patent. And he didn't directly link to the patent, I don't think, but I did a quick Google. Maybe I'm wrong. He did link to it in a different tweet. So I don't want to say he didn't, but at least he didn't in that tweet. But there's a really interesting discovery, and that is there's basically a new storage system which AMD seem to be creating for Zen 4. I mean, for all we know, it could be never coming to a product, but it does look like a good contender for Zen 4, and it's for decompressing and compressing cached data. And an interesting little note, and Underfonts did mention this in response to Ian Cuttress, who of course worked over at Anantech. It's a very smart guy. I'd suggest you give Ian a follow on Twitter as well. He said that it reads an external L2 cache 1120, which is typically external to the processing core 1104. These are obviously the figures that it's noting here, but located on the same chip. So basically it's saying that the L2 here is not a separate die or a separate part of the silicon. It's just not actually directly connected into the CPU core itself, much like we would see for other architectures. But the real interesting thing, again, is the fact that we are looking at improvements on in compressing and decompressing data. And this is seemingly a rather consistent theme with AMD at the moment in terms of what we're seeing with RDNA 2 and certainly going into RDNA 3, their CPUs and so on. And it, well, yeah, consistently that it's not just about the raw performance numbers, like increasing the amount of memory bandwidth, increasing the clock frequency of the CPU, raising the number of CPU cores, and all of this other, stuff, which sounds great on paper, and it is great on paper. But if you can reduce the time it takes to access data in caches, if you can reduce the size of data in a cache, those are fundamental, massive changes to performance. And I will be discussing further Apple's competition with their ARM-based chips, as there is a lot I have to say about that. And some people are writing off Apple's solutions as gimmicks or not that impressive, and I'm here to tell you that from my standpoint, I think Apple's solutions are very impressive. From a performance per watt standpoint, they are putting an immense amount of pressure on what Intel and AMD can bring to the table. And don't forget that these are not x86 chips. Now, obviously, they can run x86, but and that's obviously emulation and all that stuff that is outside the scope of this video. But if we look at the actual x86 architectures, it's the architectures themselves. Well, they have a lot of inefficiencies, and obviously they have a ton of legacy instructions and all this other stuff, which, quite honestly, is increasing the power consumption. And you can do things like, gating on the silicon and, whatever else, but at the end of the day, there is a finite amount of work that you can do. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this works over the next coming years, because laptops are obviously very sensitive to performance per watt needs. However, even the desktop, it's like, yeah, there's like, you can't just ignore the potential of these architectures from Apple. And I say that as someone who's not Apple's number one fan. I don't own any Apple products, and I kind of grimace when I see someone pull out an iPhone. But you also have to admire the fact that these pieces of silicon are very impressive. And given the fact that these are ARM architectures, and obviously Nvidia have made some, well, yeah, let's just say moves in the ARM space, as we all know, it's going to be fascinating to me what this means in the server space as we go forward in several years' time. I would also stress, of course, that Intel and AMD are not going to rest on their butts. They will be producing some really impressive silicon, as we've seen, of course, from Zen 4, early previews already. And we do know that Intel are not just, idly going to sit on the 14nm train for the next 20 years, hopefully. But anyway, there's a lot more I have to say about all of this, and now RDNA 2 has actually released, and we've got some information now onto the architectures. Obviously, there'll probably be white papers and so on that will release over the next couple of months now for the architectures. I think it gives us even further insight into the consoles. And to me, this is a really good indicator of why the ray tracing performance of the consoles is what it is. I have to say that ray tracing on the Series X, I haven't again got my PS5 yet, but the ray tracing on the Series X is impressive. But ultimately, it's not going to outperform a high performance, Nvidia RTX 3080 kind of thing, just because it is what it is. And there are obviously concessions as well, simply because of, the constraints of a console. I do think that RDNA 2 is really good when it comes to the scalability of the architecture, but I'll discuss more about this in the future. Anyway, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. It's been a lot more rambly than usual. Wow, I can't speak suddenly. Yeah, I had a lot to say about this. Let me know your thoughts on RDNA 2, and also if you managed to grab one. I actually made a post about this on Twitter, and some people were saying that they did manage to grab a card, and obviously congratulations to those who did. And if you didn't manage to snag one, what are your plans? Are you just going to wait for Nvidia? Are you just going to kind of hold out for the custom cards, or what? With all of that said, thank you very much for watching the video. The normal stuff: like, share, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Take care yourselves. Bye for now.